Good evening, everybody. Welcome to another Ask Professor Paranormal. It is Sunday, February 18th, and happy to be here. Good to see a couple people already in there, Jody and Sandra, of course, Graveyard Grog. Nice to have everybody here, and I'm guessing we'll have a few more people coming in. So, welcome again, and of course, this is an hour of time to ask me questions, bring up topics. I'm happy to, you don't even have to make it a question. Just ask me to talk about something. I can riff on something related to parapsychology, the paranormal, that sort of thing. At the moment, just to remind everybody, we've got classes running probably a little too late, but you can still probably jump into the classes if you want to for the Ryan Education Center. And I see a couple of people. Hi, Brian, and hi, Kathy. Kathy Nadal is one of our certified mediums for the Forever Family Foundation. Paul, hi, good to see you here. So I'm currently teaching a couple of classes that, we can talk about some topics. One of them is a field investigations class talking about kind of the baseline appropriate methods for doing investigations. And the other is on altered states of consciousness, dreams, including dreams and meditation and psychotechnologies and all sorts of other fun stuff. Heavy focus on dreams as it happens, partly because I wrote a book about the subject. I will, before I go any further, I just want to remind everybody that I do have my paranormal casebook available right now on Amazon, and should be available in other booksellers as well in paperback. I had intended to have the Kindle version ready by now, but schedule-wise and work-wise, just crazy. It's gotten crazy this past couple of weeks, and will be even crazier next week or two. Anyway, good to see folks there. The field investigations class, I'll just mention, one of the things that comes up quite a bit is discussion with my students or from my students about why we differ in the history in parapsychology and looking at doing these investigations from what's on TV. And honestly, the biggest difference is TV shows are going for ratings and we're not. We should be going for funding, but funding has not been really forthcoming for the most part for field investigations. So I think that when people ask, so what are those differences? There's two major differences. One is we rely much more heavily on human beings. In other words, the witnesses, psychics, mediums. Not all of my colleagues work with psychics and mediums, but we rely heavily on the actual experiences that people have and the witnesses themselves. And we rarely, there's very few people in my field, unless we're brought in by a TV show, unless we're going for fun, who are going to do an investigation of a prison or an asylum or sanitarium. Unless there are people working there who are having experiences who have asked us to come in and investigate. The real issue here for us is that when you have a spooky old building, whether it had a bad history or not, that doesn't mean it's haunted, at least not by spirits. It could have imprinted information. That's a different thing. But we always look for the ghost story. We have to have an experience, and preferably recent experiences, because I do know, and actually looking at the history and our literature there and talking to my colleagues in different parts of the world, there are some very old places that used to be haunted. They were investigated 50 years ago. There was a lot of activity. No more activity. Things are very quiet, except the fact that the ghost hunters are going in there because they have history. So there's really no indication that anything's happening there. So that's one big difference. So we want to work with people, and I know some of the shows have kind of led to to ghost hunting groups methods mimicking the shows, basically kicking the witnesses out or ignoring the witness testimony because it's so-called anecdotal evidence. I know a couple of the shows that were pretty big on that, ignoring anecdotal evidence and then going ahead and having their own experiences, which in fact are anecdotal evidence. So very, very hypocritical in some respects. The other thing we don't do is we don't investigate in the dark. We don't wait till, if the phenomena is happening at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, if we can be there at that time, that's when we will try to be there. We might be there other times as well for much longer than that, maybe come before, but we want to try to find out what the patterns are. And it's very unusual, extremely unusual, especially in the residential cases, for activity to happen in the middle of the night when people are asleep and the lights are out. Most reports of apparitions and hauntings happen when people are fully awake, and the lights are on, or it's daytime. In fact, so much of activity actually happens during the day. The only reason to investigate in the dark, two reasons. Our reason would be if that's the only time and that condition that phenomena actually happens or is reported or is experienced. And then we'll still do investigative work when the lights are on, so we can figure out if there's anything normal causing people to come to the conclusion the place is haunted in the dark. And the other is ratings. We don't do ratings. We don't look for spooky, so we don't need to work in the dark. And I have seen plenty of situations on these TV shows where they go in and turn the lights out. They're only there at night, and yet the phenomena that's been experienced is experienced by the day staff of these public places, the people who are there during the day, and not anybody after they close, not anybody at night, because there's maybe nobody there except maybe security or maintenance. So it's pretty much set up for television spooky, because that's what gets the ratings in general. So those are a couple of things. And when I say we rely on the humans, we do use some equipment, but the equipment is mainly used to confirm or support witness testimony and experiences. That's what it's used for. And that is looking at what's going on in the environment that might be connecting to or correlating to the witness experiences, to what people have experienced. However, most of the technology, the equipment used, can also find that there are normal explanations. In fact, more often than not, we use the equipment and we can actually find the normal explanations with that equipment, then we can actually find anything paranormal. Always remember that there are no devices yet that have been created, built, invented to detect something that seems to be only detectable by living systems, because perhaps we don't know what we're trying to detect. In other words, there's all sorts of people that think it's electromagnetic. It's pretty much, ghosts are pretty much not electromagnetic. We know that. That doesn't mean they can't affect the electromagnetic environment, but they're not electromagnetic in nature for a number of reasons we know. They're not optical. They don't reflect light or give off light. So if somebody sees a ghost, it's all a psychic impression. It's not something your eyes are picking up. Again, we have pretty good idea and good evidence that that's the case. So there's all these bits that indicate that it's all a psychic, in other words, mind-to-mind communication or mental phenomenon, more than it is a physical phenomenon, although apparitions and hauntings seem to have some connection from time to time to environmental changes, which is why we focus on environmental devices more than anything else. So anyway, that's kind of like my opening diatribe for things. I see some other folks, Kathy, Mystic Review, hello, and Tina from New York, good to see you here. All right, anybody have any questions or any topics they'd like me to talk about? Anything in particular this time around that we've got? And if not, I will, because I don't want to have some dead air here. Maybe let me think about this. Maybe I'll tell you a ghost story. So actually, let me tell you a little story, a couple of things that have been reported to me over the years. I hear stories from people quite often, and there's a couple of really good stories which are not in my paranormal casebook because they're actually not my stories. So before that, let's see. Hi, Liz. Paul, Chris Angelin's podcast recently, he says he believes in near-death experiences as no one has claimed Randy's $1 million prize. Any thoughts? Well, number one, Randy's $1 million prize has not been offered since 2015. Secondly, no one, how do I put this? No one who's worth their salt was actually going to apply and agree to Randy's terms. Over the years, I wrote several, even as he changed it, I wrote several articles for Fate and for other places, was interviewed about these things, about the actual challenge and the rules of Randy's challenge. And the rules of Randy's challenge were set up so that if you lost, you could not, Randy could say whatever the hell he wanted about you. could really kind of ruin your reputation if you even had one after he announced you lost. And actually losing the challenge wouldn't have normally ruined anybody's reputation because people don't always test well. But that he could say anything. He could malign you, defame you, whatever he wanted, and he had every right to do so. You couldn't do anything about it legally. If he won the money, Randy owned the rights to the test and all claims, meaning he could still defame you, say that you tricked him, that you conned him. Now you'd have $1 million, but you could say you won the challenge, and he would immediately say, yeah, but you cheated. And you couldn't really do much about that. So it was not worth actually taking the challenge. I know several psychics who looked at it, actually had their attorneys look at it. I had an attorney look at the challenge as well, an entertainment attorney who also represented athletes, and they all said, no, 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 no. No one goes for this. So the challenge ended in 2015. There is another challenge now that is, I think, $500,000 from the Center for Inquiry. But and the rules are not as bad. At least I haven't seen the final rules. But there's a lot of reasons why it wouldn't work. One of the main things that they're asking for is that the psychic or psychic practitioner can perform on command as often as necessary. And that's not how human performance works. That's not how human beings work. So especially when you have an ability that is more of a talent than even a physical ability. You can't ask a baseball player to hit a home run every single time. There are different conditions, different situations, but human performance, the psychology of human performance it doesn't work that well. So I don't expect anybody to actually take that. And it's the $1 million prize. When people actually raise it now, what is it? Almost not 10 years later. It's 9 years later. I've had people at lectures I've given. In fact, this happened a couple of years ago. Somebody insisted, spoke up, was a skeptic in the audience and said, why hasn't anybody won $1 million prize? Nobody's even going for it, he said. I said to him, I shut him down. I said, yeah, nobody's going for it because it hasn't been offered for several years, which this guy was unaware of. And that's something that probably Chris Angel wasn't aware of, but the skeptics love bringing that one up. Kathy, has anyone gone to Octagon in Washington, D.C.? I don't know. That's a good question. I am not aware of anyone who's done that as well. Brian, have you had any paranormal experiences lately? I have not. Been so immersed in some more mundane stuff that I don't think anything has risen to the top for me at this point. And unfortunately haven't really had any cases to work with. I've been working at a distance with a couple psychics and mediums on some situations that have developed for people, but I haven't personally had experiences lately. Paranormal Concierge, Mariah. Hi, Mariah. Do you know of any unique haunted must-visit places to visit in Ireland? I'll have to look that up. I'm sure I have some notes from Sandra O'Hara about that, but I'll have to check and let you know. I can also ask a couple of my colleagues over there in I think there's one of the folks I know might be in Ireland. The others are certainly in the UK, and they'll know. Chris Angel and mentalist called Banachek. I know Banachek. I know Banachek pretty well. Claimed to disprove psychic mediums. Yeah, I mean, Banachek is a skeptic. He is at least somebody you can talk to. He and I have had chats about this stuff along the way. He's actually very interested in remote viewing. But, unfortunately, the main issue for these folks is who are anti-psychic medium is they still are under the impression that mediums hook people in for constant visits, in other words, scamming people. And that while there are some out there, that's not what's going on with most mediums. And they're either unaware or don't want to be aware of the evidence that shows that mediumship can be a grief relief. There have been clinical studies of this, that working with a medium in grief counseling can be a real positive experience for people. And then you have the other question they have, of course, is, they don't believe in life after death. That's a different story altogether. Anyway, I mean, Banachek is an interesting person, Steve Banachek, and a friend of mine. But again, definitely a disbeliever along the ways. He is, like I said, interested though in remote viewing. Do you know anyone who has passed over, not on the report of heaven, hell, purgatory, and so on? Well, um, the mediums that I work with have gotten not. I never hear anything from a medium. And Kathy, you're here. Maybe you can talk about that. Um, Talking about hell or purgatory. It's not that. Most of the mediums come across with the same kind of fairly general description of the afterlife, that perhaps it is hell if you're confronted, with everything you've done in your life. That's kind of the life review after you die, and maybe you were not a good person and now it's hitting you all at once. That might be hell for people, but not the place, so to speak. All right. Do you have a physicist friend? Yes, I have a very good colleague of mine who is a physicist, Ed May, in fact, who ran the Stargate program for the US government for a number of years. And I actually know some other physicists too. Do you know if the TV medium Tyler Henry? I've heard good things about Tyler Henry from people. Um, but, I think that when you see people on TV, there's a lot of the producers will pick very specific successful things. Even when John Edward was on the air years ago on Crossing Over, they shot for 4 hours and they picked the most successful. There was editing that was going on, but in that 4 hours, he did really well. And Edward submitted himself to scientific testing and did really well under controlled conditions. I don't know that Tyler Henry has done any sort of thing under controlled conditions, but a lot of the conditions, people who are working with him have been very happy about it. Kathy, I watched a video of Hans Holzer showing spirit photographs on a slide projector. I did not see that. I have Holzer's book on psychic photography from many, many years ago. I have that book. And there are pictures in it that are interesting. But the question always is whether these are spirits, or obviously there could be some other things going on there too, in terms of photographically. But are they spirits, or are they projections or effects of the person who's taking the picture? It's the same with EVP. Holzer was an interesting character. I got to meet him a couple times. I spent a day with him as we had a little conference for the Parapsychology Foundation. In fact, you can find it in the Parapsychology Foundation's YouTube channel. It's trying to remember. It's the Science of Ghost Hunting or Ghost Busting. It's if you run my name through the YouTube channel for the Parapsychology Foundation, you'll find the conference. It was myself, Holzer, Tony Cornell, and Carlos Alvarado for that piece of it. Paul, you enjoyed watching the podcast called 10 Questions About Parapsychology. Yeah, I can't remember who was interviewing me. I do so many of those podcasts, of course. Yeah, Kathy doesn't get hell. We do get regret. Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, it makes perfect sense that people will be in regret and maybe guilt after death too, I would think. But the idea, you have to remember the idea of heaven and hell, and there's been all sorts of afterlife. Well, dimensions, places described in all sorts of mythology around the world. There's a couple of books on the history of heaven and hell. I've got a couple of them here, in fact, and it's worth reading because in some respects, hell was kind of like an evolution of ideas from previous peoples in the Near East, the Middle East, and then kind of altered and played with by the Catholic Church and other folks. And as that evolved, those ideas evolved as well. There's no hell in the Jewish religion, for example. So at least not as such. And in other religions, there's no hell either. I mean, there's an underworld. If you look at the ancient Greeks, the ancient Mesopotamians, there's an underworld, but it's not necessarily considered hell. Tartarus in Greek mythology, where they threw the rest of the Titans and some of the monsters, that might be considered hell, but that's not where most people went when they died. Okay. Psychic skeptic Michael Shermer hosted a show called Exploring the Unknown. I am not familiar with that show. I know I've met Shermer once and talked with him a bunch of times over the years. So that was quite some time ago. He comes across as much more middle of the road, but he really is a disbeliever in many respects. And on the other hand, he's actually had experiences. So he also knows, I think he has a better understanding because he's had experiences, mystical experiences of why people believe what they believe and a little bit more perhaps empathy for them, even though he doesn't agree with them. Tina, I've seen both Tyler Henry and John Edward live. They seem legit. They don't bat 1,000, but definitely get more correct than yourself and your classmates. Yeah, Edward, in a couple of the examples that he did under control conditions, um, it was really interesting how, unlike the so-called phishing or cold reading that was done, he didn't get any feedback. Or even when he did, it was a confirmation of one thing, and then he just continued down a path without stopping, which would not fit almost anybody else. So he did come up with some very specific information. And one of the things that we look for in the mediums that we certify in the certification process for the Forever Family Foundation is information that is truly evidential in a situation or where you cannot have any leakage of that information. People like Kathy, who is with us, Kathy Nadal. So it's really very, very different than what you might see on TV in many respects. And I think it's actually different. I've seen mediums at some of the group events for the Forever Family Foundation who didn't just put the word out, say, does this fit anybody? Because that does happen. But they actually would say, walk over to somebody and say, somebody, is it you? And then they'll say it and the person will nod their head. So that's a little different than what you typically see. Kathy, recently on an investigation with a group that used a millimeter. One of those devices spoke like a computer. All right, so I guess that was probably, well, millimeter usually is EMF and temperature. The ovilus is the device typically that speaks out either fragments of, like phonemes, so fragments of words or whole words. Are they accurate? Millimeters should be accurate in terms of temperature and EM fields, but that doesn't mean it's picking up anything paranormal. That's if it's built correctly. But the thing that speaks the ovilus is based on the idea that spirits interact and cause something in the device to come up with the right parts of a word or right word. And that's the problem with that is, number one, interpretation of what's coming through, because I've seen situations where word comes through and people just immediately try to fit it to a question or a situation where it could be fitting a whole bunch of different things. So that's a problem. And secondly, we know living people affect random systems. We've tested this in the laboratory. And if the ovilus or the spirit boxes or those other things are working on a random principle, it's probably more likely, unless someone, Kathy, like you, is there saying there is a spirit here who's trying to communicate, it's more likely in most of these cases that it is the operator or kind of a group think that's affecting the device than there's a spirit. You have to have some verification or support that there actually is a conscious entity there to begin with in order to bring this evidence and connect it to that. And even then, it could easily be one of the operators who's causing the words to pop up. And then there's the issue of interpretation. All right. There's a video. Let's see here. Used to watch the show Sightings. Yeah, I think there are some YouTube channels that have kind of pulled together a lot of the Sightings episodes. Henry Winkler was the executive producer for the first few years. His company, never met him, but I don't know how involved he actually was. But I was on a number of the episodes, including the first psychic ghosts and psychic powers specials that Fox actually broadcast for a few years. Myself and Carrie Gaynor. In fact, Carrie and I were involved in getting cases for Sightings with their help. So we did something kind of press releases and things to get cases. And then we vetted the cases early on that they were going to have. But there was a change in management, you might say, at the top. And at some point, there were situations where Carrie was involved where the clients, because we did a lot of residential cases for the show, the client was told that they would actually, the show would actually fly Carrie out. This is a case in the Midwest for follow-up. And that was a lie. They had no intention of flying. They didn't even tell Carrie that they were going to do, the same thing. So it was a problem. So Carrie backed off, and I backed off for some other reasons as well. Just the show, the people running the show, it wasn't Winkler anymore. The people running the show were not interested in kind of portraying things accurately or helping the clients that we were working with. Video of on YouTube of Dr. Drew scanning Tyler Henry's brain during mediumship scans. Oh, I have to look for that. Okay, Jen and Rich Cutshall. Do you think that highly emotionally charged events or environments increase the likelihood of a haunting occurring? Yes, in the sense that most hauntings, but not all, the ones that we really notice have not just kind of activity recorded, but emotion embedded into them, which is why so many people are worried about, awful events that happen in a place. Does that haunt the place later on? And the answer is maybe. The environment seems to be involved with that. The environment, the one connection between EMF and any of these cases we found that has some consistency, but not 100% consistency, is with electromagnetic fields and hauntings, not with apparitions, not with ghosts, but with hauntings. So there's some element here, and it seems also the Earth's magnetic field's involved in that too. Okay. Susanna, did that investigation you were involved in the Everett Theater ever air for the Learning Channel? Susanna, I think so. But I don't recall if that did. I wasn't there for that, so I don't recall if they ever let me know that aired or what show it was, unfortunately. I'll have to look into that a little bit. Kathy, did you ever meet Sybil Leek? I would have loved to have met Sybil Leek. I read all sorts of her books when I was a teenager and through high school. And then when I met Martin Caidin and started working with him in the 90s, Martin Caidin was a science and science fiction writer, capable of PK. He was a consultant to NASA, however, NASA's history. He also was good friends with most of the astronauts over the years, the original Mercury 7 and a lot of their families. He was an aviation expert, science fiction writer, science writer. And when I first met him and started talking to him about stuff, he started telling me stories about Sybil Leek. And I was like, what do you mean, Sybil Leek? And he said that she lived in Cocoa Beach in the 60s. I don't know that I ever read any of that. And she knew a lot of the folks at NASA, including many of the astronauts. In fact, he told me that Sybil had done, because she did astrology as well as psychic readings. She did a chart. First of all, she did charts for a lot of the astronauts' wives and readings for them. And she did a chart before Apollo 13 went up for the Apollo 13 mission. It was requested by one of the wives. And it was not a good chart, let's say. In fact, she predicted a lot of the stuff. This is a couple of years before. She predicted a lot of the stuff that actually happened, according to Martin. And he believed that there was a copy of that chart somewhere at NASA in the files, locked in the files. Interestingly enough, I believe that was also before Marty actually wrote his book Marooned, which became a movie in 1968, which had some serious predictions of its own, which seem to have come from Sybil Leek's readings, in fact, of the Apollo 13 mission. And remember, Apollo 13 was planned with 12 and 11 well before 11 took off. So this is kind of like going back. They knew who the astronauts were who were assigned for several missions in advance. And one of the things that's also interesting out of that is that Sybil and Marty did an investigation at a place that today is called Ashley's Pub, which is on A1A, one of the main drags near Cocoa Beach in Florida. And it's in my book. It is in a paranormal casebook, a write-up of that. And Marty talked about he and Sybil witnessing a lot of physical activity at this place back in the 60s. So she sounded, from what he told me, she was a pretty wild lady. Big, she had a Cadillac convertible, and she drove around, and she knew everybody, and it was not something I ever expected to hear about this woman. So for those of you who don't know who Sybil Leek was, look her up. Very cool character. Let's see. It would have been more interesting if Dr. Drew had also scanned Tyler Henry's sitter client, which was Steve-O. Yeah, that would have been interesting too. There was a brain scan using EEG of, I think I mentioned this last time, Dr. Oz did that by bringing in someone from an EEG institute in the Midwest. And they did some brain work with Teresa Caputo. This is probably during the second season of Long Island Medium. And her brain activity was very different, communicating with them and communicating with spirit. So that was going on. And I found it really amusing because the one thing, people always talk about that some people don't want to be tested. In Teresa's case, she was resisting the whole, the brain cap, the electrodes and stuff. And her fear was her hairdo would get messed up. It was pretty clear it was all about her hair, nothing else. So, okay. Melody, can you define what a sensitive is, or is it just, it's a popular term being tossed around with no real meaning. Some people talk about it in reference to being psychically sensitive, but honestly, when people call themselves asensitive, I have to ask them what they mean by that. And if they mean psychically sensitive, they should say that. I was invited on a case with a group from Sacramento a number of years ago. And the team that was there for this case all had their own roles. There was the team leader and the equipment guy. It was just kind of silly. It was kind of very stereotypical. And one woman introduced herself as a team sensitive, but also she was the team debunker, which I thought was bizarre. And as I found out, she was sensitive emotionally, because there was another woman who was there who had just joined the team, who wasn't part of the official investigation, who was a very good psychic and medium. I ended up working with her quite a bit afterwards. And what she was picking up matched what the woman in the house was experiencing. What the sensitive was picking up was way off. And when I started asking questions of her, she got really upset because she thought I didn't believe her, and she practically started crying. So she was emotionally sensitive. So you got to ask what that means. All right. Any ghost stories of the White House? I don't know about actual investigations, but the Lincoln bedroom was supposed to be haunted. There are books, a couple of books written about the ghosts of the White House going back decades. So definitely the White House is haunted. All right, Tina, let's see. Laura Lynn Jackson works a lot with Dr. Jeff Tarrant, where he looks at her brain activity when she works. Yeah, I mean, there is Tarrant. There is also, of course, Julie Beischel, but folks associated with Windbridge and others who have done brain research. There is more and more interest in doing brain work, at least understanding what's going on in the brain of psychics and mediums. We tend to find that mediums are more volunteering. They're oriented towards that than psychics. A lot of psychics are. Hi, John. Let's see. You mentioned Graham. She lived. Oh, knew Sybil Leek. All right. Yeah. It's interesting. Sybil apparently moved around quite a bit. For those of you who really don't know who Sybil Leek was, she promoted herself as the kind of witch queen of England. That she was supposedly the head of the Wiccan religion in the UK. A claim that was, let's just say, a little overblown. But she wrote good books on telepathy and a number of other psychic topics. Still have a couple of her books, in fact. I kind of enjoyed her writing style. And based on what I learned from Martin Caidin later on, her writing style is entertaining, which makes sense. I have not watched Sam Parnia's new documentary yet. And I know he has a book coming out. I did see an announcement of that. But I'll keep an eye out for the book, of course. Didn't Windbridge conduct some brain scans? I believe they did, yes. And I don't know if the Julie Beischel and Mark Bacuzzi themselves didn't do it, if they worked with folks who did that. Okay, and Susanna remembers Sybil Leek, yeah. You know, there is an episode of, and I think it's on YouTube, there's an episode of The Amazing Kreskin, who's a mentalist. He had a TV series back in the 70s, and there is an episode where he sits down with Sybil Leek. So I think if you put into YouTube, I'm pretty sure it's on YouTube. If you put in something like Sybil Leek and Kreskin, you'll come up with that interview and get a feel for who she was. All right. What does Ed May think of the afterlife? Ed May is a materialist and does not believe in life after death. That's the simple thing. Ghosts, doesn't believe in ghosts necessarily. Interested in, especially given some of the cases, he's expressed interest in the USS Hornet case. Ed doesn't believe in reincarnation, but he thinks that the cases with children who remember previous lives are extraordinarily interesting and need serious research. So, John, you met Sybil. I assume you met Sybil. That's very cool. I would have liked to have met her. Like I said, I met Holzer a couple of times. He was another big name during the 60s, especially in 70s. And his daughter, Alexandra, has brought a lot of his books back into print. You're a member of many parapsychology NDE Facebook groups. Paul, how many Facebook groups are you in? A bunch, but honestly, I don't have time. I really, I really don't have time to spend time in any of the groups. I mean, I learned weeks later that one of my colleagues on a reincarnation group, because somebody posted something about a ghost case, he in the thread he asked me what I thought because he saw I was a member of the group. I only found that out weeks later. So I have limited time to spend. My job during the day is on a computer all day. I teach online classes at night. Honestly, there are times that I just don't want to be on a screen, this kind of screen. I can watch TV and veg, but it's a little harder for me other times. So I'd have to clone myself. And, if you watch the movie Multiplicity, that doesn't always work out really well. All right. I know, Paul, I know that Project Consciousness Facebook group is your main one. Yeah, I mean, occasionally dip my feet in, but I cannot spend the time going back. I don't even watch my stream, like I'm on my own page that much. I occasionally check in on a couple of my hobby pages, which include a couple of sites that focus on the shadow and other pulp heroes or Edgar Rice Burroughs, and that's about it. And that's barely touching those at all, too. Susanna, your first interest in the paranormal started with Hans Holzer. Probably the first books I read before I found the true science books on parapsychology were Holzer's books as well. I mean, I have a collection of many of his paperbacks from the 60s. Bernhard J. Herwood is another person who wrote books on psychic experiences back then. I got to meet him actually when I was working at the American Society for Psychical Research. And then who's another one that I met that I read a lot of? Susie Smith wrote books back in the 60s and 70s that were extremely good as well. So those are all three names from that time period. And Martin Ebon eventually started putting books out with articles and other things. And he ended up being an editor and columnist for Fate magazine. And actually was the one who brought me into Fate after Scott Rogo passed away. So those are some old names from the past. Holzer's books are out there. Herwood, I don't think any of his books have been reprinted. Susie Smith's probably not as well, but Scott Rogo, R-O-G-O, some of his books have been reprinted. I highly recommend you seeking them out as well. Kat, Hans Holzer, yeah, he was very influential. I mean, he was known as the ghost hunter. He was the successor to that title, I think, in the U.S. Harry Price was the one who really popularized that phrase and title in the early 20th century, although that title goes back much, much further than that. And then we had, here in the States, we had Holzer as the ghost hunter, and Peter Underwood was the ghost hunter of the UK. And Underwood's books are now available. Many of them are available in Kindle format very cheaply. So I've been buying a bunch of those that I didn't have. All right. Yeah, Fate magazine. I enjoyed writing for Fate. It's just that it still exists. The owner editor, Phyllis Galdi, had some health issues, so it's been kind of it's coming out very sporadically. And the newsstands dropped it because of its size, its digest size. Brian, what is your personal belief about where we go when we die? My personal belief, and perhaps this is because I'm a science fiction writer, is that the afterlife is more different than we can imagine. We will be consciousness without a body. We will not be here in the physical world anymore. What we consider the physical world, I mean, typically it's going to still be physical universe, but I have no clue other than that having worked with so many mediums and looked at so much evidence throughout the field's literature, my own investigations, talking to people with experiences, I have no doubt that we survive in some way. I just don't know what that afterlife actually looks like. And I think that what mediums talk about and the messages they get back, it's limited by human concepts. So we can't fully describe things properly. One interesting science fiction novel, if you can find it, that an author actually explored the idea of a completely different kind of afterlife is a book called Traitor to the Living by Philip Jose Farmer, one of my favorite sci-fi writers. And in that, the universe, he considers the consciousness as electromagnetic, and when you die, your consciousness becomes an electromagnetic being in the electromagnetic universe, which is a different dimension altogether and very different than our world. So kind of an interesting thing there. Susanna, people share disbelief that I don't believe a God exists, but do believe ghosts do. It's all a matter of evidence. Yeah, it's interesting that I've been attacked by people when I say I believe in ghosts or apparitions, consciousness, and I don't hold a belief in God. I don't call it a disbelief, but I guess I fall into the atheist spectrum. I certainly don't believe in the concepts that humans have given the idea of God. I'm more of a Jedi. I believe in the Force. But I'm not religious, and people are have been attacked. Actually, was attacked once on a show by someone who was promoting a horror kind of situation like Amityville. If you don't believe in God, you don't believe in God. How can you believe in ghosts? Or vice versa. If you believe in ghosts, you have to believe in God. It's like, I don't know why you have to believe in one or the other. You can believe in, certainly a lot of people believe in God and don't believe in ghosts. Why can't you believe in ghosts and not believe in God? So, not a big deal. Kat, some say that psychedelic drugs prepare one for the afterlife. I've talked to people who had a bad trip. I hope that wasn't the case for the afterlife. I don't know if it prepares anybody for that. It certainly brings up all sorts of creative stuff. And under the right circumstances, psychedelic drugs, hallucinogenic drugs can actually open one's consciousness up a bit more, make you more psychic perhaps, although not during it's hard to tell that you are during the trip, so to speak. They certainly provide people with spiritual experiences and mystical experiences. Those can certainly prepare one for other states of existence. But then also a sensory deprivation tank can do the same thing for some people. So, I know that certain practices in certain indigenous peoples involve psychedelics or hallucinogenic substances, and that is to connect with not necessarily an afterlife, but often the gods, spirit world, or whatever you want to call it. So I think that any of that might prepare us for extraordinary experience. And certainly the idea of dying and existing after death is an extraordinary experience. Okay. What do you think of the mindset of discarnate spirits? Are they like dreaming? Well, I mean, not from what, are they dreaming? I mean, the apparitions or ghosts that we deal with who have not transitioned to the other side seem to be conscious and aware of our world here. They don't sleep per se. I don't know that they are as active as the ghosts on the TV show Ghosts, but dreaming is the TV show Ghost has them going to sleep, which is I've never heard from an actual ghost or through a medium or through a psychic. Actually, I personally haven't heard anything from an actual ghost. So however, one thing that what came up, which was interesting, is asking questions in a couple of cases of the apparition of the passage about the passage of time. And the response was something that time doesn't mean as much to them other than, and they really don't know the passage of time other than seeing it being day and night. In other words, seeing the environment change, unless they look at a clock. Because, and they don't have a body clock anymore. I mean, biologically, we have something, a sense of time, a sense of duration because of our body clock. So that's not something that consciousness without a body would have. So that's got to be a little different too. How I see it. Okay. Again, I don't know, Kat. I've never taken a psychedelic or hallucinogenic drug, so I can't give you a personal feeling for it. But I do know people who have, and a couple of them had bad trips, and they hope that the afterlife wasn't what they experienced. Others have had, good experiences, mystical experiences, and they felt connected. They feel like, a little bit more certain that there's going to be something more. So. Do you have any recommendations for any great paranormal fiction novels? Well, yes, I have two right off the bat called Afterlife and Near Death. Each title is 2 words, both by Rich Hosek, Arnold Rudnick, and Lloyd Auerbach. Those are our two paranormal mystery novels. But other than that, I do recommend, on the mystery side, I recommend the Psychic Eye series by Victoria Laurie, Laurie. The home renovation series, the haunted home renovation series by Juliet Blackwell, and the haunted guest house series by E.J. Copperman. And then there's the haunted bookshop series by Cleo Coyle. Those are all books authors whose books, those series I follow. I love Copperman's haunted guest house stories because they remind me of some old TV shows like Topper and things like that. Otherwise, there's classics like The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson. It's sort of a thriller horror novel. And along with that, I'd say that books by Richard Matheson, including What Dreams May Come, which is about the afterlife, made into a movie with Robin Williams. The book is excellent. The movie was okay. Book is excellent. Matheson is the name of the author. He also wrote Stir of Echoes, much better book than the movie. Movie was with Kevin Bacon, but a decent movie. And then there was The Legend of Hell House. He also wrote the movie, the screenplay for the movie. The book is called Hell House. The movie is called The Legend of Hell House. Matheson's fiction, horror or otherwise, because he also wrote Somewhere in Time, which is a romance, kind of a sci-fi romance, which became a movie with Christopher Reeve and Jane Seymour. He wrote some lovely stuff, but he wrote a lot of stuff about the paranormal, about psychic things, about ghostly things, and he was incredibly knowledgeable. He had an entire research library about the paranormal, about parapsychology. He was friends with Barry Taff, my colleague, who's a parapsychologist. And Matheson wrote a novel, not a novel, but a short book, which you can find, I believe it's in Kindle format these days, called Mediums Rare, about the history of mediumship. Excellent book. I have a copy of the first edition here. So definitely, that's all good stuff. Okay, and there's so much other, paranormal mysteries. There's paranormal cozy mysteries. There's actually, I think these are in Kindle these days. There's another mystery series involving a psychic. They're books by a woman named Martha Lawrence. And I knew her years ago. She and Victoria Laurie are both psychics. So Victoria Laurie is a psychic. I recommend people, if you're looking for a psychic for a reading, not a medium, but a psychic, I always recommend her. I've lost track of Martha Lawrence, but her book's also really good out there. Holzer said in many interviews that he believes in moving the ghosts on. Not everyone believes in that during an investigation. Yes, correct. And actually, I don't think Holzer actually did that. My feeling is this, if there is an actual conscious entity here, you need to talk to them or have someone talk to them, such as a medium, and find out what they need. But I also find that sometimes their need is tied to psychology, that they're afraid to move on. And all you can do is actually give information. So we've actually done some ghost education or education of ghosts in some cases. I did that quite a bit with my friend, my late colleague, Annette Martin, and other psychics that I've worked with. If the only time I move them anywhere or have kind of forced them anywhere has been out of the house if they're bothering people. But I feel very strongly that as human beings, because they're still human beings, they have free will. And there may actually be a greater reason why they're around other than the fact that they're just simply don't want to let go of their house. So we have to sometimes kind of inform them if they say they don't know that they're dead, because Holter was also a believer that ghosts didn't know they were dead, which is why he moved them on. That's not the case in most instances. So if they say that they didn't know they were dead, we kind of take up the communication to convince them of that as much as possible. But I think forcing someone out of moving a ghost on is inappropriate in so many cases. All right, Paul, you've seen the movie After Death? No, I have not. I know which one. I think I know which one you're talking about. The documentary. I haven't had a chance to see that one either. All right, Jen and Rich, you and your wife are both artists. Wife is highly sensitive, believes she has medium abilities, runs in her family, and her grandmother was a renowned psychic. She is not really comfortable. Well, that's why we're here in parapsychology. It has also helped people become comfortable with their abilities as well. And I'm happy if you want to connect with me, Rich. You can always send an email to me. It's profparanormal@gmail.com or askprofparanormal@gmail.com. Happy to chat with you and your wife. There's been laboratory studies looking at the relationship between creativity and psychic ability, and there's an absolute connection between those two. And yes, Kat, Richard Matheson. He also wrote I Am Legend, which was a great book, one of the first vampire books I think I actually read as a kid. It also became a movie. I think it may be the only movie that Vincent Price starred as the hero. There was the movie I Am Legend with Will Smith, which is not really about what the book was about. It was a kind of a sudden shift, and closer to the movie The Omega Man, which was with Charlton Heston, which was based on the book supposedly, but again, not vampires. The Last Man on Earth, which is a public domain movie you should be able to find on almost any streaming service and on YouTube, starred Vincent Price as the last human being in a world of vampires. It's close to the novel. Highly recommend that. And yes, Richard Matheson also wrote for the Twilight Zone TV series, wrote a whole bunch of the episodes. He also wrote the movie The Night Stalker and the sequel The Night Strangler, which then became the TV series Kolchak the Night Stalker. That Night Stalker movie, that first movie, had at the time, for many, many years, it had the highest ratings of any TV movie ever. And it's still, I've watched it actually since then, many times over the years. Kolchak's a great series, and that movie, though, is just phenomenal. Just a great vampire movie. And that's based on a book by Jeff Rice. So Matheson's script based on someone else's book. The book is very good. Matheson really created a great movie, though, in character. Jana Rich, comfortable, though, with these abilities at this point. She has communicated with several entities, shown her information about their identity and life. Find interesting is she reports that the images she's shown look like sketches or drawings. It probably is the way she actually processes information, Rich, like you're supposing. That is correct. People process psychic information differently. Mediums talk about getting different kind of sensory forms of the information. And this happens with everybody to some extent. Okay, and then Kat says the moving the ghosts on paradigm is somewhat similar. Alan Kardec's spiritist elevation of spirits writes, yeah, that is true. And there are those people out there. I know there's spirit rescue folks who supposedly come, and if you have a spirit in your house, they'll move the spirit on. Apparently, whether the spirit wants to or not. And again, I think that moving them out of the house is different than moving them on when they're not ready for that. There really could be some higher reason why the person didn't move on. for a lot of reasons. Okay, Susanna, you're looking forward to seeing. Oh, yeah. So, okay, for those who don't know, I will be at the Oregon Ghost Conference. It is March 22nd, 23rd, 24th. I believe that's right. Or 25th. So that's 23rd, 24th, 25th. And I'll be speaking on that Friday evening and also on Saturday evening as well. On Friday evening, I'm performing my Professor Paranormal Psychic Mind Theater show, and it's OregonGhostConference.com. So you can get there. It's in Seaside, Oregon, which is on the coast. So I'm looking forward to seeing you, Susanna. It's been years, and I'm looking forward to kind of checking it out. Also, my colleague, Ankasha Amenti, who's a great psychic and medium, will be there doing the panel with me. We're going to be doing a kind of a discussion on Friday night, and then she's doing her gallery reading on Saturday night right after my lecture. All right. Let's see. Moving the ghosts on is also not copacetic with many who come from ancestor veneration cultures and religions. Absolutely. I had a conversation with a Japanese medium I worked with many years ago doing several different TV shows for Japanese television. And Mrs. Gibo and I talked about that, and she's like, yeah, that's a no-no for her. So yeah, 22nd, 23rd, and 24th. So it's that Friday is the 22nd. Thanks. That's what that is. Yeah. Okay, Jody, thanks in chat. Well, I'm glad you enjoyed the chat. We're almost out of time here at this point. If folks have other very last questions, we got 2 minutes left. I will just kind of point out again, there's that Oregon Ghost Conference, which is the 22nd, 23rd, and 24th of March in Seaside, Oregon. So just look up or just Google Oregon Ghost Conference 2024, and you'll find that information. If you feel like coming, if you can make that. Otherwise, I'm sure there are going to be some things I'll be doing here in the Bay Area. Soon, I do have the classes that are ongoing right now for the Rhine Research Center finish up at the end of March. Our next set will start in, I think, the first or second week of May. And I'll be doing a parapsychology and anthropology because I'm kind of a cross-cultural class. And I will also be teaching a class on developing your intuition. And I can't recall what the third class is, but I think there's a third. I'm pretty sure there's a third class I'll be teaching as well. So and then after that there'll be classes, short classes in the summertime in August, and then we'll be back up with long classes in the fall. So thank you, everybody. And I'll be back again on March 3rd. That's 2 weeks from tonight. And then March 17th is after that. Come with your questions. Always email me questions in advance or even ideas of things for me to talk about so I can kind of keep going from the very start. It's always hard to get started here. All right. Thanks, everybody. And as we're counting down to that last half a minute here, I want to wish everybody a great couple of weeks. And Kat, I hope you received the email I sent you as well with that bibliography. All right. Thanks, everybody. And enjoy yourself.